I can't start my video for some reason. Hello?
Hi, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I
You.
think I'm here now. Okay, thank you so much. What an honor to be asked to share with you all today and to introduce my coworker, Amirah Mitchell. So I'm going to speak briefly and pass it on to Amirah. I was asked to share a little bit more about True Love Seeds and our work, and to also introduce Amirah for her talk, which I'm very excited about. So briefly, True Love Seeds kind of came to be several years ago. My partner, Chris Bolden Newsom, and I were introduced a while back to the concept of seed keeping. Not just saving seeds, but saving the cultural and traditional pieces of seeds, the stories, the rituals, the recipes, where did these varieties come from? Who truly loved these to the present moment, and how can we make sure they make it to the future with their stories intact? And so that was really the inspiration behind starting True Love Seeds. My partner and I have worked for well over a decade, each of us, in the food justice movement. So that's really the roots of this work for us, is supporting communities in their own, self-determination around access to food that's healthy and culturally appropriate and affordable. And so it's also from there that we decided to start True Love Seeds as an engine to support food justice projects in getting to the point where they're saving their own seeds and producing seeds to share more widely through our company. And so after a 4-year break for me from being very active in the food justice movement, while I was working under the mentorship of Dr. William Moyes Weaver, who has been keeping his grandfather's seed collection alive that was started in 1932, I really was able to learn the art of keeping seeds and telling stories from Dr. Weaver, as well as some really other amazing seed keepers I met along the way. Um, and so after that, in 2017, we started growing for the True Love Seeds catalog and launched it at the end of that year. And in very early 2018, I heard from Amirah Mitchell, who wrote me an email saying that she was interested in learning more, that her passion was for African American foodways and keeping seeds, and wanted to kind of uh, come see what we were doing and learn from us. And it was such an amazing email to receive. And here we are 3 full years later, three growing seasons later. And Amirah is a really central and important part of the True Love Seeds team and the work that we do, and really helps to shape and guide what we're doing as well through her passion and experience with this work. So to say a little more about Amirah, um, you know, she brings this focus on African diasporic seeds. A lot of the varieties that we carry in our catalog that are in the African diasporic collection are grown on our farm because of Amirah's interest in those crops. We also work with, this year, up to 50 farmers besides our own farm who grow for the catalog, and we do profit sharing, sending 50% of our sales income back to them. But about half of our catalog is grown by us at our farm. And while I focus on Southern Italian crops and Irish crops, and all of our other coworkers and apprentices focus on their crops, Amirah's focuses on things like the rice from Trinidad in our field, and hopefully soon the green glazed collards, which maybe she'll talk about now, and countless other varieties important to the African and African American experience. Um, so beyond that, Amirah has really taken on like an intense focus on learning the ins and out of cleaning our seeds. There's no one else on staff that I trust as much as her in doing the final seed cleaning for all the varieties we offer in our catalog, because of her intense focus to detail and kind of understanding of what is a seed at its ripest, at its most viable. I want to read her bio before I pass it on to you so that I don't miss anything important. Amirah Mitchell has been working in agriculture and the food movement for over a dozen years, initially as a teen farm intern, team leader, and board member at the Food Project in Boston, Massachusetts. She has since worked on urban farms in Massachusetts, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, and delivers various agroecology workshops, including agroforestry, soil ecology, urban gardening, seed keeping, and more. Amirah is a practicing seed keeper of over 2 years, focusing on food crops of the African diaspora. I guess that's over 3 years now. Um, Currently, she is studying horticulture at Temple University and is spending her third season, she has finished her third season working at True Love Seeds. And we look forward to continuing that working relationship. So without further ado, I'm really excited and honored to pass the mic to Amirah, who speaks so wonderfully about her work with seed keeping. And thank you, Amirah, for sharing with all of us.
Thank you, Owen, so much for that introduction. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Amirah Mitchell. I'm a farmer and seed keeper. I work at True Love Seeds, and I want to talk to you guys about seed keeping, collard seeds in particular, and not just seed saving, because seed saving is when we participate in the act of preserving the germplasm, the actual seeds of the plants from year to year. But seed keeping goes deeper than that. Seed keeping involves keeping the stories as well, keeping the memories alive, keeping the cultural traditions alive as you keep the seeds and the plants alive. So I'm going to start with a story, if that's all right, my own story, and tell you about what collards mean to me. And then I have a PowerPoint presentation just to cover some of the basics of seed saving of collards. And then if anyone has questions, then we'll go from there. So, well, as Owen said, I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, and I didn't grow up on a farm. My first farm experience was a summer job when I was a teenager. But even though I grew up in the city, it was very important to my mother to instill a love of nature in me. In fact, she wanted to instill three specific things in me as I grew up, and that was a love of God, a love of nature, and a love for my people. And by my people, I'm talking about Black people, my community, particularly the descendants of African peoples that were forcibly taken from their homeland, enslaved and oppressed, and against all odds were able to retain pieces of our culture and forge a new home and piece together a new identity that was shaped by others on this land that we share as home. So I grew up with my mother telling me our history and quoting scripture to me and taking me for long hikes through the Blue Hills Nature Preserve near where we lived. And at the intersection of these three loves of mine, of God, nature, and Black people, I found and fell in love with farming. And that wasn't exactly what my mother had hoped for. You see, my mom was born, my mom's mother, her mom was born and raised in Thomasville, Georgia, which is cotton picking land. And my grandmother grew up on a farm. And so she grew up with livestock and cotton as well. And she told me that when she left the South, she never planned to return again. She moved eventually to Detroit, Michigan, and that's where my mother was born. And then they moved again to Boston. And no one expected me to want to be a farmer. It wasn't something that I think anyone saw in the cards, because a return to farming wasn't part of what we thought our family story was going to be at the time. But for those of us that have moved north as part of our family history, many of us who come from families that Black families that moved from the South to the North, there can sometimes be a feeling of a bit of a disconnect with our heritage. Speaking personally, I felt growing up often disconnected from a part of my heritage because the American South is the heartland of a lot of Black cultural identity. And it was something that I felt at family reunions when, there's just this slight tension under the surface, when you make that pilgrimage back home to the South. So many of us left in the Great Migration, in both of the Great Migrations. And so there was always a little bit of that cultural tension. But one thing that always united me to the rest of my family in the South was the food. It was soul food, which brought us all to the same table. And we had Thanksgiving with my dad's side of the family. They're from Virginia by way of North Carolina. My grandma lived in Jersey, and she was the keeper of the recipes. And no meal was complete without the greens. For Thanksgiving, we would have the cabbage, we'd have the green beans from the can, and a little hastily tossed together garden salad. But the collards were really the star vegetable because they took so much time to prepare and so much love had to go into that vegetable in order for it to come to the table. And at the end, it was dripping with the juices of the meat and the hot sauce that it was soaked in. And this past Thanksgiving, I had the fortune of being able to spend it with my family, and those greens were so good. If you were here for the earlier part of the week, you'll have heard Michael Twitty, who spoke on the history of collards. So just as a quick recap, collards are originally from Eurasia, and the early version of the collard, the colewort, emigrated to North America as a poor people's food. And enslaved Africans took this underappreciated crop into their gardens and adapted the colewort into what we now know as the American collard by adapting it to conditions of the South. And so the collard, to me, has a really important place in the foodways of the African diaspora. And that's one of the reasons why they're so important to me. When I first started farming, I think many of us who garden or farm may have had this moment of epiphany when we first dug our hands into that soil, that good earth, and felt how healing it is to our bodies, our minds, our souls. And I think for many African Americans, and for me, the memory of farming can be a reminder of a very painful past. And so in working with the land, with crops, and with seed, we must also work through so much of this trauma. And when I first had that experience, that moment of epiphany, digging my hands into the soil, I felt this instant connection with my ancestors. I felt their pain. I felt their resilience, their pride, and their joy. It felt like coming home. And so I bring that feeling with me into the work that I do as a farmer and seed keeper, growing the crops of the African diaspora. And as a seed keeper, not merely a seed saver, but a seed keeper, it is important for me to hold on to the stories of what makes the crops I grow so special and important to pass down. As the granddaughter of two incredible women with amazing collard recipes, collards in particular hold a special place in my heart and have become an important part of what I want to pass down. As a descendant of those who found themselves in an unfamiliar land and adapted what was available to them to recreate their own cultural cuisine, I feel a mandate to preserve the seeds of my heritage and ensure their survival into the future. and as a future ancestor to all those who come after me. And I think about this a lot, about what my descendants will say about me as an ancestor. I want them to know that everything I've done with my life's work, saving seeds, making sure that the histories, that the stories stay alive, is in trust for them, is an offering for them. So I hope that in my story, you can find some reasons of your own to become a seed keeper, to grow and eat and cherish and save seeds from collards and any other plant that's dear to your heart. Yeah, I'm gonna start talking about the nitty-gritty details now, about saving collard seeds. But as I go on with my PowerPoint presentation, keep in mind that saving seeds is only the first step. It's keeping seeds, it's keeping their stories, remembering why they're important to you and to all those who came before you, to every single pair of hands that seed has passed through. That part, that's the part that's really makes the seed special. All right, so I have to share my screen. All right. Okay. Okay. All right. So, as I said before, now we're going to talk about saving collard seeds. The picture shown there is a picture of collard flowers. If you've just grown them before for food, you may not have ever seen them before, but they look very much like the flowers of many other brassicas, mustards. They're so beautiful. All right, so just a couple quick facts about collards. So collards belong to the cabbage family, the brassica family, which means they're related to a lot of other things that we eat, including mustard, including cabbage, of course. But they're also, within the cabbage family, they belong to a group of crops known as cole crops. And these are crops that all have the same, that all are the same species. So cabbages, collards, kale, broccoli, cauliflower, these are all the exact same species of plant, but they are different forms. And so that becomes really important to understand when we get into seed saving, because plants that are the same species will cross with each other, meaning that if they pollinate each other, the next generation of seeds will have a form that is in between the two parents. So if you were to have a cabbage plant and a collard plant that were both that cross-pollinated, the next generation of plant would be a kind of in between. So that's important to know which plants are in that same species. Another important thing to know about collards is that they are biennial crops. A biennial plant is basically a plant that requires two seasons to grow. And that makes it unique compared to some other plants that we often grow in our gardens, such as, a tomato, or a bean or a pepper, which will set seed in their first year of growth, and you can harvest them, whenever during the normal period of time that the plant is grown. But with the biennial plant, you have to wait a little bit longer outside of the regular harvest window. And another thing to know about collards is that they are insect pollinated, which has implications as well for seed saving that I'll get into. Okay, so growing collards for seed. Okay, so as I mentioned, collards are biennials, and biennial plants, they need what is called a period of vernalization. And this means that in order for biennials to set seed, they need to undergo cold temperatures. So if you live in an area that has a frost, you can grow biennials for seed, but they do have to undergo that cold temperature. So there's more than one way that you can go about growing a biennial plant for seed. For collards, typically people will plant them either in the spring or in the fall, or in the late summer for a fall harvest. And if you plant your collards in the spring, you can grow them throughout the summer, take multiple harvests off of them, and then you will overwinter them. And then the following summer is when you will harvest for seed. So that in that scenario, your plants are in the ground for over a full year before you are able to harvest the seed. If you want to get things moving a little bit more quickly with your seed saving endeavors, you can also plant in the fall. And as long as they undergo that winter temperature, they will still set seed the following summer. So you can plant them either in the spring or fall, depending on the needs of your garden. All right. Okay. So when you are growing seeds, and trying to maintain, for example, a particular variety, and there are so many varieties of collards. Owen mentioned earlier, actually, my favorite variety that I've tried recently is the green glazed collard. They've got this like really tender, glossy texture that just cooks up really, really nicely. But there's so many different varieties. And if you want the variety that you're growing to be what we call true to seed, which is to say, if you want the next generation of plants that you grow to look and perform the same as the plants of as the parent plants, you're going to need to maintain some isolation. And basically, as I was referring before, because when you have two plants of the same species that cross-pollinate, you can get hybridization, you can get a plant that is distinct from the original generation. And maybe that's okay, maybe that's a good thing. If you're looking to do some breeding, make your own unique collard variety, then certainly you don't need to mind anything about isolation distance. But if you are looking to preserve a particular variety, you will need to isolate your collards from other Brassica oleracea plants that are in flower. And 800 feet to about a half mile is the generally recommended guideline for collards. And that might seem like a really long distance, but because they are biennials, again, most of your neighbors that are growing their own collards, if they're not growing for seed, their plants won't be flowering when yours are flowering. And so you can get away with, growing two crops of collards right next to each other if one of them is in its second year of growth and the other is in its first year of growth. Another thing you need to pay attention to when you're planning out your garden is how many plants to put in your garden. Because if you plant too few plants, there is a risk that there will be inbreeding. And when inbreeding occurs, basically, it may not happen in the first generation or the second generation, but pretty quickly down the line, your plants will start to lose their vigor and will start to perform poorly. They might develop weird mutations. And so the more plants that you are able to save seed from and have cross-pollinate with each other, the better. You can save seeds from as few, I believe, as 5 collard plants, but that would be, that's not ideal. Ideally, you'd want 20 to 50 plants to maintain your variety. And if you have a really important variety, something that you're trying to bring back, maybe it's a family heirloom seed, then it's better to increase the number of plants that you save seed from to really restore the genetic diversity, and that will help your plants be healthy for generations. And that's really what we want. We want to be able to have these seeds in our families, in our communities for generations and generations. And if you don't have space for 80 plants, but you have space for 30 plants, and you've got 2 neighbors with space for 30 plants, maybe you could work together and collaborate to save a collard seed variety together. So there's ways to think about this and be flexible when you're planning your seed garden for seed saving. All right, so I don't know how many of you are already gardening collards, but I just wanted to quickly just go over planting, because you cannot save seeds from a plant if you don't grow it first. So with brassicas, you can either transplant them, especially in the spring if you want to get ahead of things a little bit. You can sow them indoors 4 to 6 weeks before it's time to transplant. And then after there's no hard frost, you can then transplant them outdoors. I know many people probably get their seedlings from a garden center, and they have, your standard varieties, maybe a couple F1 hybrids. But if you want to grow and save seeds of a rare collard variety, you often really have to seed them yourself. So it's helpful to learn, the proper technique for transplanting. You need you need warmth, you need sunlight, you need moisture. I'm not going to go that deep into it because that's not the purpose here. But transplanting is how I prefer to start my early crops. And then direct seeding is also an option, especially if you're doing a fall planting. You might prefer to direct seed right into the ground, about 1/4 of an inch deep. And when you are spacing your plants, whether it's for transplanting or direct seeding, when you are spacing your plants for the purposes of saving seed, you want to give your plants more room than if you are just growing for collards for your plate. And that is because when you grow collards to their full, mature, beautiful height and width, they're actually a lot bigger once they've gone to seed than when they are at the immature stage that you're eating. So, generally between 2 and 3 feet spacing for your seed collards. But you do have the option to thin them as you grow. You could space your collard plants when they are baby greens at 6 inches apart if you've direct seeded them, and then just thin them out and eat them. Because they're biennials, you also have the option to space them closer in their first year. And then after the frost in the spring, you can just thin out every other plant, or if you removed your plants, you can retransplant them back at a wider spacing. So there's some flexibility here, but ultimately, the more space that you can give your collards for seed, the better. It'll help them with nutrition, with airflow, and it'll help them really thrive. Of course, before you do any planting, you have to prepare the bed, make sure you have a nice weed-free surface, and add a layer of compost as well to give them adequate nutrition. As I mentioned before, you can harvest throughout the growing season. If you're just taking a few leaves per plant at a time, you can eat your collards and save the seed too. And when I plant collards in the spring and harvest them throughout the summer, in Philadelphia, we have a lot of pests, of cabbage moths and harlequin beetles and all kinds of really irritating pests. So I did not put this on the slide, but I should have. If you are, when you put your crops into the ground, especially if you're putting in fall crops, it can be really helpful to put a row cover over your plants to give them a bit of competitive edge when it comes to all of the things that love to eat collards as much as we do. Okay, so you've started your collard seeds, or you've direct seeded them. They've gone through the whole summer, or perhaps you planted them in the later part of the summer for the fall, and now you're ready to overwinter them. There are two ways that you can overwinter your collard plants for seed. And so if your temperatures are generally above 20 degrees Fahrenheit, you can overwinter them in the garden. If your temperatures do go below 20 degrees Fahrenheit, you can still overwinter them in the garden, but you do need to provide them with a little bit of protection for those really cold nights. So a couple ways you can do this is to put a nice layer of mulch on the bottom, just I like to use leaf mulch, or like a salt hay kind of mulch. And you can put row cover over the top of them as well, especially if it's going to drop, um, below, like into the teens. You definitely want to give them a little bit of protection, but above 20 degrees Fahrenheit and above, and they're pretty fine. It's actually really important to let them experience a little bit of cold. You need to just let them, if there's like a light frost coming, you might want to leave them uncovered so they can experience the frost, because that will help them when the spring comes to know that the time has come for them to produce seed. If you don't feel comfortable overwintering your plants in the garden, or if you live in a very cold place, you can also store your plants indoors, which is something I have never done. I'm trying it this year, so we'll see how it goes. So I can't speak from experience about this particular point, but you can dig up your entire plant, making sure, of course, that you get the entire root. And the collards have this, they have this long woody stem that goes into the root zone. And you want to make sure you dig all of that up and as much of the roots around it as possible. You then remove all of the outer leaves from the plant, leaving the growing tip. And you can store it in moist sand or moist peat in a cool and in a cool location. For example, a root cellar is basically designed for this purpose. And then, at the same time that you would be starting your spring crops, after the frost, you can then remove all of your stored collards from the basement and transplant them into the garden. And you can have the plants that you're growing for seed right next to the plants that you're growing for that year's harvest. And then after that, you get the seed harvest. So the seeds, the collard seeds, when they mature, is going to really depend on where you are. But generally, at some point in the early part of the summer, you'll begin to notice the seed pods are becoming brown. They're drying up. And there's a couple pictures here. You can see what the seed pods look like. They're quite, they almost look like a bean pod, right? But when they are ready, they become really crispy or brittle, and you can pop them open really easily, and the seeds inside should be firm and brown, and that's when you know they're ready. Another way that you'll know that your seeds are ready is because the birds will discover them before you do. If you have any goldfinches in your area, they delight in seeds of the brassica family, and you'll probably want to put some bird netting around your plants as the seed pods start to mature before they fully ripen. But once they're ready, what you can do is the way that the flower, right, the way that the flower is structured, you can take pieces where the seeds are pieces of the stem where the seeds are the driest and the brownest and the most mature, and you can sort of harvest them as you go and basically just cut the whole stem. Or you can, if you'd like, you can chop the whole plant to the ground. But you do have to be cautious because the seeds will shatter. So what we do is typically, we'll have a bucket next to us, and one person can cut the plant at the base. It'll mostly be dead at that point, but you can cut the plant at the base and then put it quickly upside down into the bucket so that the seed heads, if they shatter, will shatter into the bucket. You can also put a tarp down, and you can gather the plants as you harvest onto the tarp. And sometimes you'll have seeds that mature a little bit ahead of schedule before everybody else. It really is great if you can get those early ripe seeds. They really are some of the best. But you're not going to get every seed. Lots of seeds are going to shatter to the ground, and you'll have all kinds of volunteers if the conditions are right. And so then next you really want to lay those branches that you've harvested out to dry, so that the seeds, it's really important during this whole process to make sure that the seeds don't have any lingering moisture attached to them. So you can just leave the whole plant to dry for a little bit if there is any moisture. So the next step of the process is to thresh the seeds, is to clean them to separate the seed from the plant. The way that we typically do this is to just whack the harvested plants against a bucket. And if the plants are pretty dry already, you can go straight to this step. And so you can just, whack the plants against the bucket, the seeds will shatter. The seeds that don't shatter very readily typically aren't very ripe. So you can just leave those be. If you've got a very small amount, you could just rub the pods in between your fingers and the seed should fall right out. And then what you're left with is a bunch of beautiful seeds and lots of chaff from these seed pods that you can then blow off. So you can, blow it off just by blowing on them. I think one of the better methods is to pour the seeds in front of a fan into a bucket, adjusting the fan speed so that the seeds don't also blow away. But this way, most of the chaff should easily blow off. Or you could find some kind of a strainer that the seeds can fall through, and that leaves the chaff right at the top. So once they're clean, they're ready for storage. Again, it's really important to make sure they are completely dry. So if there is any lingering moisture, or if you just want to be very safe, you can just lay your seeds out to dry for about 2 weeks before putting them into an airtight container. And then, and some people put like those little silica dry packs in there as well to help with the moisture. And you want to store your seeds in a place that is cool, dark, and dry. So a basement works well, your fridge works well. You can also, I've stored seeds in the freezer, which you can also do. I can't stress enough, though, how important it is to label at this stage. A good seed label will save a collection. If you can imagine years later when, one of your grandchildren or great-grandchildren comes across your collection, if there are no labels on any of the seeds, how will they be able to tell their stories? So it's really good to keep a label. You can label the date that you as you go, that you processed them. You can label the date that they were stored, and that way you know how long they've been in storage. Collard seeds will last about 6 years in storage, so you do want to make sure that you're growing them out at least every 6 years, or every 5 years because they're biennials. And so you definitely want to have a label for that, but also include a label that says, where your seeds came from, who gave them to you, how you got them, and make sure that part of the story is also recorded. So that's another important part of seed storage, is the labeling. So now we're getting into seed keeping. We've done the hard physical work. We've planted our seeds, we've grown them out, we've harvested our seeds, we've stored them, and we're ready to tell their story. So, becoming a seed keeper. I hope I've inspired you all to become seed keepers. And as I've said over and over again, the important thing is to tell the story. When you tell the stories of seeds, you're keeping them alive, and you're also protecting them, because as our seed system becomes consolidated and as people's land is stolen, as people's seeds are stolen, so much is lost. When my ancestors were forcibly taken from their land, so much was lost with their stories, with their seeds. So much I've needed to do so much work to try to recover some of those stories from my family, of the seeds of the plants that nurtured us on our journey here. And it's really difficult work because of that painful history. And it's not just history, right? So even still today, um, a lot of seeds and their stories are being lost as, seed keepers. If they don't pass on the stories, uh, that entire history, the good and the bad, can die with you. So tell your story. Um, Another thing that you can do is you can make it your own. You do not have to just save old varieties. We didn't get into this really, but you can breed your own varieties. It's as simple as letting two different varieties of collards cross in your garden. Just don't isolate them, and see what happens. See, you can make your own variety that way, or you could just let it happen naturally. If you have a variety that you really love, but you want to improve it, maybe you want it to be a little bit sweeter, you can taste all of your collards, see which plants are the sweetest, and just save seeds from those. And in that way, you've now got a sweeter version of your favorite collard. It's really something that is part of your story as well now, because this collard will always be um, changed by your participation in its life story. Every time that we grow seeds in our gardens for more than 1 year, we're adapting it to our gardens, to our homes, to the place where we live, in the really unique climate of our soils and of our ecosystem. And so every act of saving seed is also an act of breeding the seed, of entering into a relationship with the seed. And through many generations, that seed becomes a part of you, and you become a part of that seed. And it's really important that you pass it down. Um, the work of the Heirloom Collard Project um, wouldn't have been possible without the multiple families of seed keepers throughout the Southeast that saved a variety, that chose specific qualities that they liked in a variety and kept it for generations, making something that's unique and wonderful, and passed it down. And then sharing it beyond just your family, share it with others, get other people involved in seed keeping. This is all part of how we can enter into this right relationship with seed. So, well, that's a lot, I know. But tell your story, make it your own, pass it down, and share it on. So a couple do's and don'ts just to close. Do label everything. Label as much as you can. Do keep backups. If you have a bad year of seed, you don't want to have planted all of the seeds from the previous year. You do want to keep, at least 2 years of backups if you can, so that so if something happens, you can always have reserve seed. Do share resources. Share with your neighbors, with your family. You can share land, you can share seeds, you can share knowledge. Knowledge is a really important one, especially with a lot of the farming practices that we are working to recover. Sharing knowledge is important. The Seed Savers Exchange has an excellent network of seed keepers sharing knowledge. Do eat your greens and save them too. it's important as you're saving your seeds that you also get the opportunity to eat the food that you've grown and to put it on a plate. How else will you really understand that plant unless you eat it? And do get your family and your community involved. And that's such an important part of making everyone part of the seed keeping process. Don't be afraid to experiment. You can play around with your plant selection. You can play around with your varieties, with all of the little requirements, with isolation distance. You can experiment with that. But most importantly, don't forget to tell their story. Your seeds have a story. You have a story, and you have to tell it. So as I close, here are some additional resources for you guys, some excellent books that I've benefited from. And if you would like more information, these are all great places to start. The Seed Savers Exchange website also has a lot of great information for when you're ready to take that step to save your own seeds. All right, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Amirah, for sharing your personal story. It's really inspiring and really moving to hear your words about your relationship with seed keeping as a seed saver and seed keeper myself. It's just really beautiful to hear your story. So thank you so much for sharing that. And all of this awesome information about how to share collard seeds is super important and helpful to all of our viewers. So thank you so much for that presentation. So now we're going to get into some questions from the audience. So if you have a question, you can write it down in the chat and I will ask Amirah. So the first question I have for you is, are you willing to share your Thanksgiving collard recipes from your grandmothers, or those like special family secrets? You can give us like an abridged
Well,
version.
I can't tell you everything because that you'd have to be part of the family. Every recipe is special, but I can tell you that that I prefer my collard greens with smoked turkey neck. But the other half of the family, my dad's half of the family prefers it with pork. I can tell you that what am I legally allowed to say here? I can tell you that we smother it with hot sauce and we simmer it for a very, 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 very long time. Other than that, though, you might have to just look up a good recipe for yourself because the process is a secret.
Okay, great. I'm taking some notes, so I'll come up with something. So another question, how many seeds will you typically save from a variety? What's like maybe a ballpark number of how many seeds are good to save per variety?
I'm not sure I understand the question. You're asking for each variety, what's the minimum number of seeds that you can save?
Yeah, I think that's the question.
Okay. So what's really important is to make sure that your seeds have a large genetic diversity, meaning that they came from a really large number of parental plants. So as I said before, if you have 20 to 50 plants that you're growing out, and let's say you have 50 plants, and you want to ensure that your varieties are able to be maintained into the future, but you also want to harvest some of them just for your own consumption and maybe thin out your garden if you don't have enough space for 50 plants at 3 feet spacing. You can maybe take half of them. Now you've got 25 plants. And I would save all the seed that you can after you've cleaned it. And you need to make sure that you have enough to plant for several years. So if you are sharing your seed with others, You do need to, it is important to make sure that you can reserve enough seed for yourself. So let's see, that would be at least 50 seeds for the following year. And for, let's say, 6 years after that. But you know, I hesitate to give an actual number because I, always want more. You can always share if you have too many seeds, if that's a thing. And it is really important to have enough in case of an emergency. But as a bare minimum, enough for 50 plants for the next 6 years is what I would say. And I've been seed keeping for 3 years now, and I know that there are many people who have far more experience in seed keeping than I do. And so forgive me for if I say anything that's an error, and thank you so much to all of you for allowing me to speak from what knowledge I do have.
Great answer. The person that asked that question says that that was a super helpful answer. So
Great.
Yeah. Another kind of technical question. What do you recommend for trellising plants as they grow? Do you trellis them? What?
Yeah. Trellising plants. It is one of those seed keeper specialties because I can't tell you how many plants need trellising in the garden. And especially when it comes to plants that you might not ordinarily trellis, the collards that I'm growing just for personal consumption or for a market, I don't trellis. They don't need it. For me, it's enough for me to just keep harvesting from them, and they never get so big that they're in need of trellising. But with the plants that you're growing for seed, they often do need trellising. That's a really good point. These plants can grow taller than me, and I'm a fairly short person, but they do benefit from a little bit of stabilization. So we generally just put like a couple stakes in between every, maybe 3 or 4 plants, and just loosely, rope them in with a little bit of twine. It doesn't have to be, as firm as like a tomato trellis, but a little bit of support is beneficial. The other thing that's nice about trellising them is when you have those stakes in the ground, it's really easy then to just throw bird netting over the top to protect them from the birds when it's time. It's a good question.
Great. Another kind of technical question about germination testing. Do you germination test that True Love? What is your process for that? Can you talk a little bit about the importance of that?
We do definitely germ test our seeds because we are also a seed company. So we send our seeds to a lab to get them tested and get the germ test results back. You can do a home germ test if you want. But if you're growing them for your home, you don't typically, there's not necessarily a need to germ test unless you are growing seeds that are really old. If you discovered some seeds in your great grandmother's basement that you think might be viable, go ahead and you can do a home germ test. Or if you've had the seeds for the last 6 years, you're not sure if they're still good to use in your garden, you can do a little home germ test. We send ours to a lab, so we're not actively involved in that. But if you take a little bit of construction paper, you can just cut a little circle of construction paper, put it on like a dish, wet it down, count out maybe like 100 seeds, wrap it in, make sure it's nice and moist, wrap it in some like cling wrap or something, like plastic wrap or something like that. And then after 1 week, and then again after 2 weeks, you can just count what the germination looks like. That'll help.
Great. Switching gears a little bit. A question here. What should new seed stewards be conscious of when thinking about ethical stewardship, and what are the best ways to recognize the full history and lineage of the varieties we are stewarding? So how do we recognize and honor that seed story as a new seed steward?
Yeah, that's a big question, and part of it depends on where you're located in the seed world. You know, I think the answer is different for a seed company than it is for a home gardener, certainly. And when we talk about seed ethics, it's such a big issue. There's so many different aspects to seed ethics. Um, so I guess, yeah, you know, when you're a seed company, it's very different from when you are stewarding them in your home. But I think there are a couple things that you can take into consideration are, you know, one is where you're getting your seeds from, um, and and thinking about how those seeds came into your hands. I think it's always good to support uh, seed companies that are really getting it right in terms of their ethics of how they work with the communities that are growing their seeds and the communities that stewarded their seeds historically, you know, so you can look into the seed company really and where you're getting your seeds from. And if they don't have a good history with with indigenous communities, with Black and Brown communities, if you know, if they don't have if they're misrepresenting the stories of seeds, you know, that's one place to start is by choosing in that way. Another way is just ensuring that when you're telling the story, you're telling the whole story. You can do the research. We all have the internet these days, or someone you know has access to the internet. And so we can all empower ourselves to learn about the history of the foods that we love and enjoy. I think it's also a little bit different when when you're talking about seeds that are part of your own um, cultural heritage, and when you're entering into a relationship with a seed from a crop that you're unfamiliar with, that's not part of your history, or that maybe you have a complicated history with. And so part of understanding, for example, I think collards is a great example, because it's a crop that was born in the gardens of the enslaved, right? And it's a German Eurasian crop, and it entered into the diets of wealthy white Southerners in this really complicated way that involved all of these food cultures coming together in ways that were often harmful. Acknowledging that history, being able to incorporate that into your story, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being a white person that loves collard greens. That's part of your story too. So, you know, part of the ethics are making sure that you're telling that story and honoring that story, you know, shopping when if you're making a seed purchase, doing that ethically. If you find yourself in possession of a rare seed, um, and there's a community that could benefit from that seed, there's ways that you can interact with people to become, you know, to enter into conversations with people's communities, to rematriate seed to them. There's just there's so many answers to that question, but I hope that just begins to touch on some of it. It's a learning process for all of us.
Yeah, no, I think that was really great. I think telling, getting familiar with the seed stories, getting curious, doing your research is so important. And I think seed companies, Seed Savers Exchange included, really has the responsibility to do that work. And I really hope that that changes in the future. So final question here for you today. What are you looking forward to next season? Is there any projects you're really excited about, people that you're working with, crops that you're growing? What's kind of next for you?
Yes, I am. There's so many things I'm excited about for next season. And next season, I hope to be working on a project, a community-based project, to help different communities in my region to learn how to steward their own seeds. And I'm really excited to get to interact with people and learn so much about different cultures, and the food crops that are important to them. And you know, one of the things that I enjoy more than anything is speaking to another grower, maybe just a gardener, maybe, you know, a farmer, speaking to them about a food that they love, that's from their culture, and finding out somehow that across time and space, there's a connection between their food culture and my food culture, and different ways that we relate to the same or similar plants. And then when you bring seed keeping into that mix, the joy of helping someone to save a seed that's maybe something that has, that has been in their culture but out of their family for a long time. That's really exciting and wonderful. And I'm hoping that next season I can be a part of that in an even bigger way, and get to reach out to more communities and help others get their hands on their seed.
Beautiful. That sounds like such an exciting project, and I wish you the best next season, and I hope that all goes well. So Amirah, thank you so much for joining us and being a part of Collard Week. It's really just been a total joy to hear your story and your presentation. And thank you to everyone who asked questions and is watching this video. Tune in tomorrow for the final day of Collard Week. We'll be joined by Ashley Shanti and Chris Smith, and they're going to do some culinary demonstration. And then finally in the evening, Chris and I are going to host a Collard happy hour. So we have a group of Collard loving guests, and we're just going to talk about collards and drink Collard cocktails, and it's going to be really fun. So we hope that you can tune in for that. So that's a wrap. Thank you guys so much for